Ready? Good afternoon. How's everybody doing here today? Good. Excellent. You guys enjoying your Pixels, the Chromebook? Got a plan? Good time to play around with it? Excellent. So my name is Francis Ma. I'm one of the product managers on the Google Plus platform team.
My name is Chris Cartland, and I'm a developer programs engineer working on the Google Plus platform.
And today we're going to be talking about cross-platform auth with Google Plus SignIn. So just before we start, just want to gauge the crowd here. How many of you guys have a cross-platform app? For example, you build on Android and web, maybe iOS and web, both. All right, good number. Yeah, excellent. So today we're going to be talking about, first we're going to cover Auth, give you an overview of Google Plus SignIn. We're going to talk about how this relates to your server and where Auth comes in. We're going to go through the various Auth models of how you integrate this on the client side, on the server side, and then lastly, we're going to be taking questions. And for the audience who are watching on our live stream, we have a Q&A set up so that you can also submit questions. And we also have the link at the bottom of the slides so you guys can have the URL as we go along.
So let's start talking about Auth. I've been working a lot with different applications to help integrate Google Plus SignIn, and I've realized that people spend a lot of time talking about Auth. And that's because it's really important to get right. And so in the next half hour, we're going to try and make sure we can save you a lot of time by explaining how to do Auth correctly in your cross-platform applications with Google+. So the first thing is that Auth is really talking about two different things. One of them is authentication, and that's knowing who a user is. The second one is authorization, and that's actually having permission to do something. And in that case, in our case, it means having something to do with Google, permission to do something. So an example is I have a California identification in my pocket. And if I showed that to anyone, that would be pretty convincing to say that I am Chris Cartland. However, if I showed up at Moscone Center and tried to get in today to Google I/O, they wouldn't let me in just with my identification, because that doesn't prove that I'm authorized to be here. And what I need instead is to have my Google I/O badge. And that is my authorization. It says that I have permission to do something with Google. And so there's a difference between the two of them, and it's good to know that when you're talking about authentication, which is knowing who a user is, and authorization, which is having access to do something.
So building your own Auth is really difficult, and that's something that we don't recommend you do. You have to worry about things like how you transport this. If users send your password, are you sending it over an encrypted tunnel? How do you store it? Do you salt it, hash it? And also, sometimes maybe just having one password is not enough, and you got to worry about two-factor auth. And then lastly, a lot of times users forget their passwords, and I do that all the time. And this is something that you definitely don't want to have to deal with in terms of providing the customer support. So we encourage you to not to build your own auth. And oftentimes, when you don't get this right, a lot of bad things can happen. For example, this is not how you want to make headline news. So whenever you're thinking about implementing your own auth, think about the difficulties that you may potentially run into and the ramifications of getting it wrong.
Fortunately, you can use an identity provider. You want to do this because it's easier for you. You don't have to do all the hard things that Francis just talked about. It's also easier for your user because they don't have to remember more passwords. So additionally, when you use an identity provider, you can often use features of those specific platforms in order to make your app better. And we think this is a better way to reach your goal. So we really recommend not to build your own authentication and to use someone else to do it for you.
So one such provider is Google. A couple months ago, we launched Google Plus SignIn, and, and with that, we handle Auth for you. Now, in addition to taking the burdens off your hand, we have hundreds of millions of users across all of Google services, things like Gmail, YouTube, Android, and such, so that as an authentication provider, your users don't have to create a new account, and you can delegate that to us. Secondly, we make it easy by providing a lot of client libraries and SDKs so that you don't have to worry about the nitty-gritties, and we handle a lot of that for you. And lastly, is by integrating Google Plus SignIn, you also unlock the benefits of the Google Plus platform, from things like helping you drive distribution if you are an Android developer with our over-the-air install feature, driving user engagement through interactive posts, and writing app activities to Google. So let's take a look at how this works.
So everything with Google Plus Sign-In is based on OAuth 2. And so this is a protocol that allows a user to give some access to their account with Google without giving you everything. So there's no password sharing. There's scoped access. So you not only don't have to share a password, but you don't have to give up your entire life to an app just to let them do something. And this access is revocable. So it's a good security model in case access does get in the wrong hands. In order to set up OAuth, you need to start with the Google API console. And this is where you set up a project. A project is the place where all of your app starts. So you have your branding information there, which is your name and a photo, so that a user knows who they're authorizing. And within this one project, you may have multiple clients. And that means you have an Android app, an iOS app, and a web app. And with each of those, you need to give Google a little bit of information so we know where your app lives. So on Android and iOS and web, you provide a little piece of information, and that all exists in one project that a user is going to authorize.
So one of the key things we definitely want you to take away with is that setting up this project is very important. Having the right structure with the top-level project and your clients underneath that tells us this is your service. And relating to Auth, this is important because when a user signs in with Google and grants consent to your app, they're granting consent to your service, not just a specific client, not just to your Android app, to your web app, and whatnot. It's about the whole thing. And yesterday, in the Android keynote, Hugo announced the CrossPlatform single sign-on, the notion that when a user signs in on the web, they get automatically signed in on Android as well. So this is very important to set up correctly. Keep that in mind. So now let's look at where Auth comes in to your architecture. Now many of you are probably familiar with this, where you have a client, server, and Google. With Auth, you need to think about all three of these lines, whether it's from connecting your client to Google. How do we know this is really your client? From having your server connected to Google, and also between your client and your own server. So let's start by looking at client-side Auth. So to do client Auth, it's really about how you connect your client with Google and making direct API calls from there. We're going to be walking through how you do that over Android, iOS, and web. So starting with Android. On Android, we have Google Play Services, which is an extension of the Google Play platform on Android for you to integrate with Google services. With that, we've embedded all the logic you need to handle Auth so that you don't have to worry about it. For you as a developer, all you need is to integrate the client library, and we will deal with the Auth from there. And the good news about Google Play Services API is that it's available from Android 2.2 and up, so that for you as a developer, you can have confidence that this API is going to be there in a consistent manner, no matter what version of Android the user is using.
So let's get started. Basically, what we're trying to do is get the user into a state where they are connected. We'll come back to this diagram in a moment, so don't worry too much about it. First of all, everything fits into what would typically be like an activity lifecycle. On create, you need to create the Plus client. This is the object that interacts with Google Play services and does all of the hard work for you. On start, you need to ask it to connect. And of course, on stop, you need to disconnect to clean up the connection. And in the middle, while the app is running, a user may need to click a SignIn button in order to get started. We provide a button for you in this button layout. What's really nice is that this is localized into the user's preferred speaking language, so you don't have to do that work. When a user, when your app tries to connect, one of two things is going to happen. Either it's going to succeed, and we call onConnected, and in that case, you're done, and you can already know who the user is. It's very easy. The other option is that it's going to fail, and that happens for a number of reasons. Either the user hasn't chosen an account yet, Maybe the user hasn't authorized your app yet. And there can be many states in there where a user hasn't quite fully authorized your app and signed in. And so we just store that failure because that means the user's not quite ready to work with you yet. Now, when a user clicks the Sign In button, that's when you try and actually complete the steps necessary to sign in. You make sure that you click the Sign In button, that we haven't already signed in, and that we have a connection result. So this connection result was that object we stored, and it contains an intent that does everything that's necessary to get the user signed in. You don't even have to worry about what all those details are, because Google Play Services handles all of that for you. The only thing you have to do is ask Google Play Services to do it. So we say mConnectionResult.startResolution for result. The user may go through a bunch of steps through Google Play Services, but once they've done whatever they need to do, onActivityResult will be called. And from there, you just have to call connect again with the plus client. And this is we expect this to trigger the onConnected callback. So looking at this diagram again, we start on onStart, and one of two things will happen when we call connect. Either we'll be connected and finished, or it will fail. When we fail, that means we store the connection result. And when the user clicks the Sign In button, we try and resolve it. And there is a chance that onActivityResult will go back to the failed state. And that's because a user could have disconnected the app, or they could have changed accounts on their device. But that's OK, because your code already handles the resolution for that. And Google Play Services is set up to make sure that this is as easy as possible.
So we just looked at how you can do that on Android. We also have that for iOS as well. Now, iOS is a little bit different, where we handle all the auth logic for you in the form of an SDK. So for you as a developer, you can get our Google Plus iOS SDK and integrate that with your app, and we, again, handle the auth for you.
So in iOS, we need to set up the sign-in object. So we set your client ID, which is how Google knows which app you are. You can also specify your scopes. And we say that we're going to fetch the Google user ID. This is the fastest way for us to actually just know who the user is. We set the sign-in delegate to the object, whatever's going to implement the GPP sign-in delegate protocol. And that means that it will call the object when it's completed the auth. The sign-in button is really easy in iOS. You actually don't have to write any code. You just have to add a button to your view, change the custom class to GPP sign-in, and then the SDK takes care of the rest, which also localizes the sign-in button to the user's local language. You can always use your own button, and if you do that, you should follow our branding guidelines, which we have in our documentation. And then you need to explicitly call GPP sign-in shared instance Authenticate. And that's because if you made your own button, the iOS SDK that Google provides cannot handle it without you. So once you call that, though, you will sign in the user, which takes the user to Google to complete the authorization and authentication steps. When that's done, Google will open your app with a URL, with a custom scheme, and you need to handle that URL. So this is where you typically handle incoming URLs. And what we provide for you is GPP URL Handler. And this is great because it looks at the URL, first figures out, was this coming in from a signed-in user? If it is, it will return, yes, it is. And it will also call finished with auth. And it will give you all the authentication information you need. It'll store everything in the SDK, and you'll be ready to go. From there, you can just call GPP sign-in shared instance to get information like the user ID.
So we've covered Android and iOS. For web, it's even easier. All you need to do is include our JavaScript client onto your page and add the Google Plus sign-in button. And we'll handle with the user auth, you click a button. And for you, you just have to handle the auth callback. So let's take a look at how this works.
So really easy. We provide a sign-in button for you. Again, you put your client ID in there so we know who you are. Then you just need to include +1.js, which is the JavaScript that is the common JavaScript that you'll use for the +1 button or for other widgets. When the user has authenticated, you'll get a callback, and in that callback, you'll get an auth result. If the auth result has an access token, which is a sign that, that they have information that gives you access to Google, then you know that they're authorized, and you can immediately start making API calls. You actually don't even need to look at the access token other than just to make sure it's there, because the JavaScript library already uses the tokens as necessary in order to make API calls.
So we've talked about client-side auth. Now let's take a look at how you do this on the server side. So with server auth, it's about connecting the server with Google. Now, when you have multiple clients, oftentimes you would have back-end servers, so you can put a lot of your business logic in there so you don't have to replicate it across your clients. Now, doing that, the good side is you don't have to replicate it, but it is a little bit trickier when it comes to auth, because now you have to authenticate your client and server, and then now also authenticate server with Google. So let's take a look at how we do that.
Let's start with iOS. In this one, we're going to just send the access token to your server. So this is the piece of information that we need to get from the client, which has already done all the steps we've talked about earlier. And we need to get that information to your server. So make sure that you send these tokens securely. And that's because they are bearer tokens. Anyone who has them has information of the user and can act on behalf in any way that your app is authorized to do so. So make sure that you don't lose those. Send them securely. Also, keep in mind that these access tokens only last 1 hour, and they will expire. So design your app accordingly. On Android, you can do the same thing. You can get the access token from Google Auth util. Again, send it securely. Make sure that your server cannot leak these in order to protect your users. Once you've sent this token to your server, you need to verify that access token. There's 2 things you need to know. First, did this token come from Google? If it didn't, then you shouldn't be doing anything with it. The second is to make sure that it is issued to you. The reason this is important is if someone else were to send a Google Access token for their app to your server, they could sign in users to your app without a user ever actually using your app. So you need to make sure that you check that the client ID that you set up in the API console matches what you get from this token. And all this comes from the token info endpoint, which you can see here. So that was sending access tokens. Additionally, we have this one-time code that you can send to your server. So it's a very similar code. It's just a string. And you also want to send that to your server. There's advantages here. The code can only be used by your server. It is not a bearer token. This code can also get an access token and a refresh token. Access tokens last 1 hour. Refresh tokens don't expire. So using this one-time code that you send to your server, it's both more secure, because even if that code was intercepted, it's useless to anybody except for you. And then secondly, you can get a refresh token, which means your server can have access even when the user is offline. On the web, we really recommend sending the code. So you get the string from the auth result, really easy. Send that to your server. You get all the benefits of security, as well as having the refresh token to make API calls. When you get this code on your server, you again need to do something with it. In this case, you just exchange that code. Exchanging that code will give you an access token, and if you ask for offline access, you will also get a refresh token. This is really easy because our client libraries take care of this for you. Like in Ruby, authorization, fetch access token. Credentials, you just exchange code. Client, authenticate with the code. So these are just like one line, very easy. And our library will take care of the exchange for you. And from there, you also, again, don't have to worry about dealing with the access token or refresh token, because the library does that for you. This is fully available in our quick starts. You can pick your language and have it running in 10 minutes. It's really easy. So looking at ways to enable server-side auth, depending on which platform you have, you can do different things. So all of them have an access token. You can always just send that string from your client to your server. You need to make sure you do it securely, because you really don't want anybody to intercept those. But once you do that, then you know who they are, and you'll be able to use that token to make API requests. The better thing, if you can do it, is to use the one-time code exchange. And that is not available on iOS. Just this week, we're launching it on Android, so you can get that code and send it to your server. And of course, you can do it on web. And of course, the code is more secure, and you can get the refresh token.
So now that you've looked at how you do integrate Auth across multiple platforms, another thing to think about is oftentimes you're doing this because you already have an existing Auth system. And there are more things to think about in that scenario for things like how do you merge the user accounts. For example, if you already have your own login and password, when a user comes in and signs in with Google instead, you probably don't want to create a brand new user account. And instead, you would want to take that and merge it so that they're not starting from scratch. Now, our colleague Ian had given a talk about this earlier in the day, and his session will be available through YouTube and the archive as well. So be sure to check that out if that applies for you.
So what did we just cover? We actually covered a lot. So we covered that you don't want to build your own authentication system. That should be obvious, especially if you went to Tim Bray's talk. Google Plus makes authentication easy. We've actually just shown you how to do it on Android, how to do it on iOS, how to do it on the web, and how to get the information from each of those to your server. We have code that shows you how to deal with this on your server in 5 languages. You can pick those and just use it and run it immediately. All this is available in our quick starts, which will take you 10 minutes to run. If you want to see a larger application that kind of puts all the pieces together, it runs on Android, it runs on iOS, and it runs on the web, you can take a look at Photo Hunt, which is our big application that shows you kind of how everything will fit together. This is available on our website at developers.google.com/plus. And we also have additional code available on github.com/Google+. And this will do things like there's a bunch of samples that we just released today that will show you how to verify the tokens that you send from your app to your server. So really, no matter which platform you're coming from, you'll be able to bring authentication and authorization all together in one place and really make your application run everywhere that your users want to be.
All right. Thanks for coming out. And we can take questions, live questions here, and we'll also go on the live Q&A on the internet. Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Should I go first then?
All right, we have somebody here.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I understand the one-time token. So if my application, like say my Android application, it requests, actually let's start with JavaScript. So do I need to change anything in my JavaScript to indicate that I want a one-time token that I'm going to exchange on my server as opposed to a regular access token? And my second part of the question is, if I do then exchange that token, my server has the token, do I need to then do something application specific on my server that passes back into my say my Android application that then says this is how I'm authenticating between my server and my client, essentially? Does that make sense what I'm asking? Because I see that the server has a secure token that is only stored on the server. I'm not passing that back and forth. But my client, if I disconnect, shut down the app, and then come back, if I'm jumping back into the server needs to say, who are you? And I'm not asking them to authenticate again at that point, am I? Or
so can I trust? So let's start with the first one because I can answer that quickly. For JavaScript, the code is there. You have to ask for offline access, which is a parameter in the button, and then the code will be valid for getting a refresh token. The code is there even if you don't ask for offline access, but it will just get you an access token in that case. Sorry. So on to the second part of your question. Can you?
Yeah. So I'm just saying. So let's say my application then it goes through the normal G+ sign-in. I request a token. I then go to send it to the server. One-time token. The server exchanges it, and I've got an access token on the server. Mm-hmm. My app then. How does my server know that it can trust the app? Because that one-time token is expired, right? So I can't send that back through and test it at Google and say this is valid. So if my client disconnects, I mean, do I just trust that the client has authenticated and it's it's compiled
Right.
Java code, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
it's, I mean,
Okay.
does that make
Yeah.
sense?
So in that connection where that code was sent, if you have a session of some sort and you can know that that channel is the same session, then once you've exchanged that code and it was valid, you can trust all the information that was returned from Google. Additionally, you know that that session came from an app that was your app, because that code won't work unless it actually came from one of the clients that Google set up.
So it is sort of application specific. I would just need to, I mean, every server-side library will generate a session token for me, but that's happening in my app that I need to then manage.
So you have to manage that your own session
Right.
there.
Okay.
If you don't have any sort of sessions at all, and you need to send authentication information with every request, what you can do is use the ID token. We didn't actually cover that in this talk, but one of the pieces of data that you can get back on Android and the web is an ID token. This can be sent along with each request, and it can be very quickly verified to know that it was from Google and that the information contained within it is valid, and that will give you the user ID. So the advantage of that is that if you don't need to be authorization information to Google, and you just need to authenticate that request to your backend, you can offline, or if you have it's a signed Java Web Token that allows you to verify that it's real and signed by Google and that it's for your app. You can take a look at on GitHub for how to validate the ID token. We have samples in all 5 of our backend languages.
So to clarify then, so on my server I would key in my database that I've got this user ID in Google, and then from the client I send that token in, I validate it, and I come back and say this is the ID, and then I look up and say, okay, now I've got this auth token and I can use it effectively. That's basically, okay, great.
That's right.
Perfect.
That's it.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Good.
Yeah. Another thing to note, just to elaborate on that, one of our developer advocates, Tim Bray, wrote an extensive article. It's called How to Authenticate Your Client with Your Home Server. And this is on the Android blog. And that also covers very much in depth on what you just asked.
Yeah, and I think there's a blog post like verifying backend calls on Android, something like that. I always get the name wrong.
Yeah.
Let me take a look at one of the questions on here. It says, can my application ask the users authorization to post or create a new item in their Google Plus stream? So right now our API, our REST API, where you can just make post requests to it, does not support writing directly to the stream. You can look at more at Google Plus sign-in features like app activity, which is a way that you can actually write data to Google. All right, yeah, a live question.
Yes, my question is, does the iOS SDK integrate with existing Google Plus app, or is it like a web interface? For example, if you already have the Google Plus app, like Facebook does, where you switch to the Facebook app, it goes through the Auth token, and then you switch back to your own application.
Yeah, so with the iOS SDK, if the user already has the Google Plus app installed, we will fast switch over to the Google Plus app so that the user doesn't have to retype their login and password. We use the logged in user's identity of the Google Plus app, and then we just do the OAuth connection there. But if the user doesn't have the Google Plus app installed, then we go to the browser.
And is there any chance that in the future it will be integrated like Facebook or Twitter is now, where they have like a first-class integration with the iOS, or you cannot comment on that?
We don't have anything to announce at this time about that.
Yeah. But we'd always like to make things better. We realize that right now the signing in experience is better on Android, but we'd always like to improve everything that we can.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's see here. Is there a difference between a Google Apps for Business versus a Gmail user using Google Plus sign-in on a website app? And can my website app see if that user is a Google Apps for Business user? So Google Apps for Business works just fine with Google Plus if the app's administrator has Google Plus turned on. So right now it doesn't work if the administrator turns that off. Other than that, once it's on, you can't tell the difference between a user just because it's a Google Plus user.
So does that mean that, because I'm curious about this too, what if you are not a Google Apps for Business? What if you're just a normal Google
Yeah,
so the question.
sorry, go ahead. To repeat the question from the audience, the question was, if the user is not already a Google Plus user, can they use Google Plus Sign-In? Is that correct? Yes, so the answer is yes. As part of the sign-in flow, if the user is not yet a Google Plus user, we take them through an upgrade flow where they do get to upgrade as a Google Plus user. Yeah. And the process for that is simply verifying their name and basically just verifying their name. So they have a Google Plus profile.
Yeah. So we've written the code that does that for you, like in Google Play Services, that takes you through all the steps there. And on the web, we do a quick flow, and then it takes you back, and the same idea. Yeah. Good question. Did you have something else? Yeah.
I have something about this question also. If user can't create a Google Plus account, for example, if we do a game for the kids and they can't create Google Plus account because the age constraints, is there kind of fallback scenario that the user can just use the credentials from Gmail or something like this? Because the identification should work pretty much the same way like with Google Plus. I mean, if for the games it will not work because the kids can't create Google Plus account.
Okay, so you're asking about accounts for people who don't meet the age requirements to use Google
Yes.
Plus.
So under 13 years old, you cannot subscribe for Google Plus. So it means that for
Right.
kids' games, you cannot use this mechanism.
Right. Yeah. So Google Plus Sign-In won't work for people who cannot have a Google Plus account. So
Is there some libraries which can work with just like Google authentication without having Google Plus account? Because authentication mechanisms are pretty much the same. Auth is there and everything is there. So
yeah. So like I said, yeah, Google Plus Sign-In does not work if a user can't have a Google Plus account. So we're restricted by that.
Yeah, part of the value you get for integrating Google Plus Sign-In is that you also get to tap into the Google Plus platform as well. So I've mentioned earlier for getting things like getting access to the user's social graph, being able to post to Google Plus with interactive posts, and also using features like the over-the-air app install. So that's the value you get for using Google Plus Sign-In. But that's a very good point you made, which is there is a set of users who may not be able to upgrade and create a Google Plus profile, and in that case, they will not be able to sign in this way.
don't you think that would be interesting to have like a limited set of API which provides authentication features, but not like just Google Plus features, which can be very beneficial for the applications, but that will restrict from posting to the like plus pages and things like this?
Yeah, we're always looking to make sure we can get more users to make the system work. I mean, like I said, it doesn't work for apps users that have the Google Plus turned off. Yeah. So there are these classes of users that we can't quite use right now, but we think that we have a good product for the ones that it does work for, because we can do things like cross-platform single sign-on. Yeah. So like when you go to your Android app, like the unconnected callback is called immediately, and those are things that we can only do once everyone's in Google Plus. So yeah, like we don't have everybody yet, but we'd like to improve these situations.
That's the whole point. So you can have single sign-on without having Google Plus. I mean, because authentication is there with Gmail and all other services. So you don't mandatorily need to have Google Plus unless you really want to kind of post on a Google Plus page. So is there like a way to split the framework in two parts, like authentication part and Google Plus part?
Not at the moment at this time, but that's a really good feedback. Mm-hmm. We'll take that back. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to look at the question here. If you have multiple auth system, like your Django Auth user and Google Plus Sign-In, can I merge that account? So dealing with multiple accounts is something that Ian Barber's talk talks about. Or it's actually, he says, using Google Plus Sign-In with other social sign, I forgot the title now. But basically, that also deals with, basically you have different ways of authenticating a user, and how do you keep all of those straight? So yeah, that would be a good place to start, and I think he covered that there. But basically the idea is that you do have to find some way that makes sense for the user to merge different identities. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that. But
no, I think that covers it. And the material will be posted back on the Google I/O site for you guys to look at after. So be sure to check that out.
Yeah, cool.
Actually, the gentleman before me answered most of my questions, but kind of led to a new set of that. My big excitement this year is all the push for education, like the next session I'm going to. But what I just realized by his question, your answers, is that this whole Google Plus authentication system is completely worthless in that sector for that very reason. And I think maybe what he was trying to ask, and I'd like to ask, is does this have any tie-in with the existing Google authentication system? Like if I open up Chrome and I'm logged in, I get that little sign in as button, or is that available to do something like what this is doing for everyone that's not going to be old enough for G+?
Yeah, so I think there are two parts to your question. The first one is how do you address the class of users who are not able to participate in G+. And as we discussed, yeah, that is something that we're thinking about and to make better in over time. Now, the second question, which was, hey, is this Google Plus sign-in built on top of the existing authentication system? And the answer is yes, it is. It is built on top of the existing Google Auth system. We talked about using OAuth 2 and the standards there. So
let's just go off 2, and I can use that right now for just any Google user?
yeah, that's right. You can use that with any Google user.
Okay.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, next one here says, if a user updates his info, like his email address on Google+, what is the best practice to get notified about such a change to update this info, to update this info in the app? The information to get like email is actually not part of the Google Plus API. You can use a different OAuth scope to get that, and it works just as well. You just add the userinfo.email scope. And then from there, you make a request to Google to get the email address. So if any of the information in our APIs change, we don't actually have a push system to tell you what that is, but you could you could call it again.
Yeah, and I think generally it is a good practice to look at things like your caching policy. It is possible that users do change their information over time, and so for your app, it's good that you go back and check it to make sure that you do have the latest information.
Yep. Last question here. We're running out of time, but yeah.
Yeah, actually, my question is quite similar with this is one-time code, not in iOS.
Right.
Very similar. So my question actually is for the iOS users. So does it mean the server cannot support the offline sharing kind of things?
Correct. Yeah. So from iOS, you can't do that yet, and we'd like to think of ways to make this better, but it's difficult right now.
So they are like a schedule that when we could have it?
Yeah, so we have some technical limitations, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, thanks for your question. So we're actually out of time, but we'll be right out here to answer any questions. You feel free to come by and talk to us. But thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of I/O.
Thank you.